All right. Well, welcome. My name is Jacqueline DiChiara. I'm a content strategist. I've also worked at some failed startups. So I know firsthand how content can literally make or break a business. And the kind of content I create is top-notch, high-quality content. So what that means is it's writing that gets a lot of eyes, and it's high stakes stuff essentially, and it is writing that appears in all different ways. So you mentioned blogs before. I like to say publications. I think it sounds sexier, a little better, I guess. But blogs, social media, TikTok and Instagram are now and YouTube are now not just for cat videos and social sharing. They are serious business platforms. So let's talk. Let's do it. I could talk about this stuff for about 6 hours, by the way. We have about 30 minutes. So I'm going to speak for 30 minutes, and then I'm going to leave some time at the end for questions. If while I'm speaking, if something resonates with you, you want to write down a note, jot something down, we can bring it up later, and I will talk through your what you want to talk about. So let's do it. All right. Over the next 30 minutes, we're going to talk about why to focus on voice and vision. Very important. How smart content drives business strategy. I put the word smart in there purposely because I think there's a big difference between smart versus quick versus, many other adjectives you can throw in there. Why content positions you as a differentiator. So this is content that makes you innovative, that makes you stand out against what your competition is doing. And there are key ways to do this. A lot of it involves just really paying attention to what other companies are doing. And that's in a kind way, not a way of like, oh, what are they doing? But more of like, all right, I'm interested in what the market and what other companies like ours do, because I want to know where that white space is. That's kind of a buzzy phrase, but it's a phrase that makes sense. What you need to execute. What you need to execute as. Typo. Anyway, executing a solid content strategy. So the execution, the action is a key part of content strategy, and flexibility and adaptability and changing everything on the fly is part of that. I was a health and life sciences. I am a health and life sciences editor. And nothing like a global pandemic to throw into the mix to make you just really on your toes. And when you're writing about content, especially that is so new, like vaccines and unprecedented and words like that we've never used the phrase social distancing before in our lives until the last 2 years. So content strategy can change and should change. And also what you may not realize you shouldn't do. That's going to be some of my lessons and tips and tricks. I'm, again, working at failed startups. So there you go. All right. A quick bio for context. I want to let you know kind of who I am briefly so that you kind of understand where I'm coming from. So my primary background is in the health and life sciences sector. However, throw a global pandemic into the mix, and almost every company now wants to become or be integrated or associated with healthcare in some way. If you have to take your temperature before you go into work, or make a list of your health symptoms before you go into work, health is integrated into everything. So I have written / worked for companies like Harvard, McKinsey, Bain, Novartis, Oliver Wyman. And I've also worked at very, very small companies. It's nothing like going from a company of like 10 people to going to a company of like 50,000, 80,000 people within like the same month. It's a really interesting kind of juxtaposition. And for me, the key differentiator between going from like small to really big is just the resources. So small company, like I'm doing everything myself. Whereas a large company, you have different resources. Like you have designers to help you execute the content, things like that. So we'll talk about that. All right. Why to focus on voice and vision. All right, let's talk about one word, 4 letters, not a bad word, just the word Nova. There was a car company that had a car called the Nova. Very nice name, stars, uh, nice imagery, right? You say, oh, I drove a Nova. It sounds very cool, right? Well, they were very successful in the US and they wanted to bring Nova to Spanish-speaking countries. And it flopped miserably. They couldn't figure out why. They're like, what's going on? Everyone loves it here in the US. Well, Nova in Spanish means does not go. So when you had a billboard or whatever, this is a long time ago before COVID, but say you had an image of a car and then the words does not go. Your brain initially as a consumer says, I don't want to purchase that. I don't want to be involved in that. Not a good idea. So what happened? They did not connect with their consumer. They did not understand what their consumer wanted. And you can come up with theories essentially for why that happened, right? So, for example, maybe there wasn't someone of that culture, of that language, who said, hey, we need to revisit this. This doesn't make sense. Or maybe there was, but that person didn't feel comfortable raising or flagging that issue. Because if they did, the whole campaign would be pulled. And they're like, oh, I don't want to be responsible for that. I'll just keep it going. I'm going to stay out of this, But this kind of thing happens all the time. So meaning the content on your website maybe doesn't resonate with your consumer, or the style of how your social media is developed doesn't resonate. Maybe it's too outdated. Maybe the language isn't right. Maybe it's too jargony. So think about these kinds of things in your company and don't be afraid to pull outside sources. I do this all the time as a writer. I'll say, hey, which title of this article do you like the best? Because when you're too close to it, it's really hard to look at it from an outside lens. Voice, second bullet here, means what your unique perspective is. So voice is your tone. It's also what you have to say and why. So my experience working at startups that didn't really get off the ground was that we struggled to figure out what our voice was. We were all over the place in terms of what's our product? Should we be a good? Should we be a service? Who's our audience? What does our ideal consumer eat for breakfast and why? And we'll talk about that later as well. But it's like, oh, what does that mean exactly? Like, we need to focus on what we do and why. So again, what you do and why. That's a key differentiator. Your vision is taking your voice and essentially blueprinting it out and making a strategy. So, now that you know who you are and what you want to do as a company, how are you going to execute that? And I would say break that out into the week, the month, the year, the decade, and then don't be afraid to pivot on the spot as things come up. So we'll talk about that. So let's go to the next slide. So how smart content drives business strategy. This is killer. So business strategy drives innovation. It drives revenue. It drives, or I guess sparks happy consumers and happy employees and happy teams. So what does really good content look like? Number one, it's human facing. It sparks emotions. Just like that Nova example, spark negative emotions. You have like 2 seconds to reach someone and to generate an emotion. So, for example, an image in social media is very important. I was working on a cybersecurity, thank you, campaign. It was like National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And I was adamant. I said, I do not want images of men in hooded black sweatshirts with weird like data, stuff, for lack of a better term, behind them, because that's not realistic. That's not what a cyber criminal looks like. I mean, I'm sure there are some that look like that, but like that's a stereotype. So think about the images and what kind of reaction they evoke in people. This is something that companies do all the time. For example, here's my water bottle, right? It's plastic. It is a very conscious decision on behalf of companies, especially like the beauty industry. Like if you purchase a moisturizer, for example, or even a shampoo bottle, if it's priced higher, it tends to be glass versus plastic because it feels heavier. So this plastic bottle that I'm holding, it doesn't feel heavy. It doesn't feel luxurious, right? It's the exact same thing with content. If it feels luxurious, whatever that means for you, doesn't necessarily mean expensive, you're going to react to it better. Also, good content is well written. It garners respect. Depending on your audience, if your audience, for example, like the audience I tend to write for are very well educated. They are physicians, they are physician leaders, they're healthcare executives. I better believe I have my information correct when it comes to medical information, for example. Because if you're a doctor, and like in an article I was writing, for example, we were writing about something about like biotech, and I didn't understand. Like I wanted to make sure that the image that I had of test tubes and all that kind of sciencey type stuff was accurate. So I literally reached out to someone and said, "Hey, is this accurate for your job? Like these test tubes, when I type test tube into some stock image site, does this make sense?" I did an article once where I interviewed a top U.S. Army leader, one of the most respected women in the Army. And I wanted to make sure the stock image I showed of someone saluting meant something. Like, what does that salute mean? Am I offending people by accident, unintentionally? So I reached out to an Army group in my company and asked them. So that also, like, that's what well-written means as well. And you have to think about that, not necessarily where it drives you crazy, but you have to be aware of that and flag things early. Because if you make a mistake, you end up being one of those companies who gets lost on Twitter. You don't want to do that. So smart content is also very simple to consume. People are freaking tired right now. We have a global pandemic. We have war. We have so many things right now happening. And it's just the nature of the world. Like, look at your email, right? You mentioned earlier on the intro that you have so many Slack channels you never use, right? I mean, there are times I'm in a meeting, I have some marketing call on my cell phone, someone's messaging me on Slack while I'm getting emails. It's like I'm getting pinged from 19,000 different directions, and people are tired. And also, you don't know people's circumstances just in general with politics and safety and climate change, and there's just so many things going on right now. So keep your content simple, easy. Use language that makes sense. Words, if you can, it's not about dumbing things down, but it's about making it so that someone can easily understand it without having to think too much about it. And that's your touch point. So why content positions you as a differentiator? It's your opportunity for people to find you. Someone goes on your website, they come across your social media post, or they come across a video you created on YouTube. Just like what I'm saying right now is going to be recorded. This is going to be up on YouTube somewhere, up online somewhere, right? And it's like, well, how is it going to be branded, right? Like many times you come across a company where they have a YouTube channel, they have videos that have been up there for 3 years. The videos have like 20 views each, right? Like, why is that? Is it because the content isn't like marketed well? Is it because they put the content up and they do nothing to promote it? Think about that. People can engage through content that ideally informs, entertains, and persuades at the same time. This is the golden rule. Your content should inform, entertain, and persuade. By entertain, I don't necessarily mean smoke and mirrors and things like that. Entertain just means it's interesting to read. So is there a story you have to tell that where you can pull details out where you go, oh, that's really cool. That's really interesting. I never thought about it that way. Say you're a tech company. Say you do wearables, for example. Is there an interesting user experience that you've heard about that you can profile? Is there a leader on your team, or just anyone on your team? It doesn't have to be a leader necessarily, who has a really interesting story they want to share about their experience building or designing your product or service. highlight that, feature that. Think about the Ritz-Carlton. So there's a gentleman named Horst Schultz. I heard him speak once at a conference, and he is super into consumer touch points. I was fortunate enough to stay at a Ritz-Carlton for work last year, and I was super into like looking at what the Ritz-Carlton did psychologically after hearing him speak. So, for example, I was at the hotel. I was trying to figure out how to work the elevator. I couldn't figure out how to do it. Simple thing, right? You push the button, it wasn't working. Within like 12 seconds tops, some gentleman came over to me and said, "Excuse me, this is the freight elevator. The other elevator's right behind you." I said, "Oh," and because it was a nice hotel, I couldn't tell it was a freight elevator. It looked very fancy. So anyway, but they noticed very quickly that I was struggling. When you go to the Ritz-Carlton, within something like 6 minutes, they have it exactly timed out. You will get a phone call when you check into your room. "Hello, is everything okay? Did you need anything? Everything good?" And they do that because they want to minimize the pain points, right? You go on Amazon, you order something, you ever got those little cards that comes with the product that says, "Please leave us a 5-star review, or if you need anything, please write to us, email us." That's because they don't want to get like a negative Yelp review or a negative Amazon review that can destroy your company. So how do you carry that into what you do for content? Well, every interaction that you have with a client or a customer is meaningful. Treat that interaction very carefully, because like your emails to someone, that's your content. It doesn't have to be necessarily client facing or public facing. Your interactions with someone on the phone, that's client facing. That's your content. That positions you as a differentiator. Every single touch point matters. So that's something to also think about. All right. What you need to execute a solid content strategy: an editorial calendar that constantly changes. So when you're thinking about what your content strategy looks like as a company, as a business, as a team, even when you're personally branding yourself, like you're redoing your LinkedIn, things like that. Think about your talking points. What interests you personally? Also, what interests your audience? They might not align. Ideally, they should. There should be some overlap. Ideally, there should be a lot of overlap. But think about that. Find the right medium, the right resources, and the right writing style. So what's very common is companies say, "Okay, we need a blog. We need an online publication, and like longer form articles." A lot of times people think that's better. My philosophy as a millennial, but also just as someone who's deep in this stuff, is that shorter content is better. So yes, you can do a 2,000-word article, and there's a place for that, but maybe a 500-word article or a 400-word article gets the job done. Now, the difference between a 2,000-word article and a 500 or 400, 300-word article is the conciseness. And like a longer article, you have more room for detail. You have more room to really expand. You have more room to really get into like kind of the nitty-gritty of the talking points. Whereas a shorter article, you really have to think about what you want to say. And actually, this ties into my theater background that you mentioned. So when I was in theater, we had to do this assignment. It was very hard. You had to take a performance that you had done that was maybe 30 minutes and turn it into a 1-minute performance. And you had to make it as good as you possibly could make it. We would work months on this. And there's actually a lot of tie-ins between my theater experience and corporate experience. Many people kind of think, "Oh, theater, that's cute. You were on stage." It's like, no, I had to present an idea and persuade people on stage. I had to pretend I was, a queen from the Victorian era getting killed by a Shakespearean knight, right? How does that relate to a presentation? It's like, well, I have to convince people of a certain thing. So it definitely ties in. Maybe I'm not wearing a crown just like a princess, but definitely ties in. So, so anyway, like that 1-minute presentation, it's the same thing as taking 1,000-word, 2,000-word article and getting it down to the nuts and bolts. And you have to be a highly skilled writer to do that. And you can start backwards. You can do the short article and then go into the longer form. But think about that. Think about how long you want it and where you want to put it. Find out which people's brains to pick. So that goes into like, who is going to be creating the content? Is that going to be someone in your team? What's their personality? Are they a good writer? Also, writing is not just sitting at your computer and typing. Writing can be having a conversation with someone and recording them and then pulling out their talking points. For executives who are very hard to pinpoint, they have very tough schedules. It's very hard for me to get even 5 minutes on the phone with them. I have some strategies. So one thing I've done, I said, okay, you're going to board a plane at the airport right now. That sounds very luxurious. I meant during COVID, but anyway, can you send me a voicemail, 3 minutes, telling me what your talking points are for this article? Because I can't write it unless I know someone's exact targeted viewpoint, and then I can fill in all the gaps and do all the research, with what I know about the industry. So you can literally ask someone, can you send me a recording of yourself talking on Zoom? Like turn your screen off so you just see a blank screen. That's writing. And sometimes people feel more comfortable doing that. Like right now, for example, I don't see anyone. I'm looking at my slides. So is it like more comfortable doing that? I don't know. Depends on someone's personality. Just food for thought to give you some ideas. All right. Is that wrong? What you may not realize you shouldn't do? Sorry, maybe that's double negative. Anyway, I made these last night at midnight. Anyway, what you shouldn't do. That's what that should say. So don't focus on the consumer. Now, you want to obviously be aware of your audience and what their needs are, but I've worked at companies where it's like, all right, what does our consumer eat for breakfast on a Tuesday? What do they look like? What do they need? Why do they want our product? Why do they need our service? And there's value in that, of course. I mean, if you watch Shark Tank for 20 minutes, there's a lot of talk about that, right? But I think people get too caught up on that, where they're not focused on, well, how do we reach the consumer? Like, how do we connect with them? How do we engage with them? So that technically is part of focusing on the consumer, but you have to expand your viewpoint on that. Don't turn your nose up at social media touch points. So you might look at someone's LinkedIn and say, oh, I don't know if they're really worth our time. You don't know that necessarily. Not everyone puts all of their information on their LinkedIn. Some people don't have Twitter. Some people don't have LinkedIn. That's fine. So if you can't find something on someone, don't necessarily think, oh, they're not valuable, they're not worth their time, because some people just choose to disengage on social media, which is totally fine. And I completely respect you if you do. So I work a lot with social media for work. It's a total cesspool. LinkedIn, like my LinkedIn has just turned into Facebook and just people bragging about themselves on all different mediums. So at the same time, it's also a very serious business platform. So I totally understand. Don't use jargon. So these are unprecedented times. I've written that phrase so many times over the last 2 years. It's kind of a weird phrase when you think about it. It's like, well, do we write like, these are unprecedented times? Like, oh, thank goodness. Like the silver lining of COVID. I pull that out of any article I edit, because usually what follows with phrases like that in articles is something along the lines of how the company made money, the company was successful. And again, there are many companies, like telehealth companies, for example, that thrived during COVID. That's wonderful. But it sounds off-putting to people. So I usually pull that out. Many articles, especially when I work with freelancers, their conclusion will say something like, now more than ever. It's filler. And it's also like, well, yes, we know, like, we're writing this article, of course, like, we have a perspective. But it's also like, now more than ever. Like, well, what if someone reads it like 3 years from now or 2 weeks from now and there's something else more pressing? So be careful of phrases like that actually kind of weaken and diminish. And just they're just fluff, they're just filler. So there are ways to say those exact same things more eloquently or differently if you need to. So anyway, but that helps your content stand out. That's a differentiator, is when you exclude the filler and then you include what you actually have to say. So think about that when you're creating content. All right. Bonus slide, hot content themes. Someone asked me the other day, what I'm seeing in content right now. And I love that question. So 3 things I'm seeing. Authentic ESG. What does that mean? So ESG is environment, sustainability, and governance. On Twitter this morning, I was reading articles about cities that are highly polluted, climate change, all that stuff. So grim news. That's why I don't like to read the news in the morning. But anyway, what ESG means for your company or for every leader, every person, every team member is how does the environment, how does sustainability, how does the government / politics, et cetera, affect your business? So for most companies, that starts with things like supply chain. My friend was complaining about the price of gas and the price of groceries, right? And I was explaining, yes, that's because farmers, were getting COVID and the supply chain is all messed up, right? So when you go to the grocery store, my favorite food isn't there. Oh, gas prices are high right now. Yes, they're high. Many top consulting firms just pulled out of, their Russian business. So that's going to affect various aspects of business moving forward. So anyway, that's a really hot topic right now. And if you're like, which we read about, think about that as a potential topic. DEI and how diversity of thought drives innovation. A year ago, everyone was talking about quotas. We got to get more women, more X group on our boards, on our teams. So I guess the question is if I have a team and I have 2 women versus 12 women, is the 12 women team necessarily better? It's hard to pinpoint, it's hard to measure, right? So diversity of thought is something that a lot of companies are talking about right now in terms of, do we have different experiences? Do we have different backgrounds? Like someone mentioned this morning on the intro that there's a really diverse group of speakers, right? As an attendee of this conference, that is going to resonate with you because, wow, all these people, all different backgrounds, you wouldn't have been exposed to that otherwise. So think about that. Also, fresh vaccine and COVID conversations. What does that mean? Many companies, and especially in healthcare, are trying to revamp their vaccine campaigns because it's yes, if I see a vaccine campaign, am I going to really say, oh, wow, that really changed my COVID vaccine perspective right now. I'm really going to go get that shot now because of this campaign. I feel like most people are pretty baked into their perspectives right now, just with a lot of things, right? Anything political. COVID is not just a health crisis, it's also a political crisis. So if your company involves content that is political of nature, is there a way to really, really reach people or really say something? Or if your content is content where people kind of already go, yeah, I know that. Yes, I know that tech drives innovation. Yeah. Is there a way to kind of put a fresh spin on it? So think about that. All right. Good timing, 9:29. I'm all ears for questions. I'm not sure how to do this exactly, but I'll hang tight. And if someone has a question, let me know. I guess I could stop sharing. That might be good.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. That was great. We do have a couple of questions that came into the chat. Let's see. Anna asked, how to increase user engagement and convert them into customers using content?
It's a very good question. Okay, so user engagement to customers. All right. So I guess I could think about things like LinkedIn Live, right? Or video content. So you have to really make sure that your content resonates deeply with people. So what does that mean? There's a psychology to content. And there's a kind of again, an emotional aspect to it. So if someone engages with you and for example, let's say they go on your website and they can't find what they need. Is your website designed clearly? Think about what are the top 3 reasons someone would come onto my website or come to my social media or whatever. And if they're struggling to figure out who you are, what you do, the About Me page of most websites or their mission statement is really convoluted and hard to understand. So what does your company do? Make it clear. So that can help.
Awesome. Thank you. Anna, I hope that's helpful. And then we have one other question so far. What is the main difference what is the main difference in content strategy for B2B and B2C companies?
It's a very good question. So obviously it's the audience. So other companies, other businesses versus people paying and buying things. I would say a lot of the main difference is the language and the tone. So B2B is probably more jargony, more strategic, more about innovation, and B2C is probably more about the problem that the company is trying to solve. And there's definitely overlap there. I would say the consumer focus tends to be simpler. And it's not that the content is necessarily simpler in itself, but I guess it's more like how to, or how can we help you, or why you should take a look at our offerings, or why we do what we do differently. Whereas the B2C is B2C is more about here's a perspective from our leader about why the industry that we serve has various challenges and what we're doing to solve them. So that's probably the biggest differentiation. And it's a different style of writing, but I'd say the tone and like who you're trying to reach is different.
Makes perfect sense. Well, it doesn't look like we have any additional questions, but just in case there's any stragglers, go ahead and put your questions in the chat. Do you have any like last thoughts you want to share? Any kind of final things that you didn't get to put into the talk that you want to kind of share with the group?
Oh yeah, there's always something. Let's see. Yeah, we could talk maybe about like social media, because that's a great place for content. I would say many people's social media, as in companies, looks very outdated. And the best way to drive followers is to engage and to post regularly. I've worked with some people in the past where they didn't really understand how social media worked. So their thinking was, okay, we just wrote an article. Let's get it up on social media, just like once. And you say, okay, that's great. Let's publish it next Tuesday. Let's publish it like 3 times this week. Like get the same article going like numerous times. Many people think that their LinkedIn feed, for example, is like a web page. Like you can post the same thing over and over again. Like not to the point where you go on and it's obvious, but like the reality is like no one's going to go on your LinkedIn and notice, except for like the editor, that you posted the same thing like 4 times in the last week, as long as you kind of space stuff out. So think about that as well, like, because it's not just what you write. It's like, what do we do next? Like, how do we get this out there to people? So for many people, that's social media. So don't be afraid to really, get yourself out there.
What you were saying about social media, I have one quick follow-up question, and Javi does as well.
Sure.
How important is community when you think about social media and like community building for your brand?
It's really important. The first thing you should do when you make a social media account is look at what your competition is doing and reach out to people. Like for example, I have my own podcast. It's called Enough-ism, and it's about meditation and mindfulness. And like the first thing I did is I reached out to other meditation podcast hosts, and because I want to know what they're doing and what they're working on, and we'll be on each other's shows. We'll host or be guests on each other's podcasts. And when you have really deep interactions with other people in this space, like I'm very, very friendly with other healthcare reporters, because I just think it's interesting. Like we're doing the same exact thing. We're both writing about a global pandemic right now. Like, how are you approaching it? And, I was at a conference once reporting, and there was this other reporter next to me. He had like 5,000 screens on 8 computers open at one time because he had to report on Twitter live. And that was his strategy. And like, I learned that. So you're going to learn things from other people in this space. Don't be afraid to follow other companies online who are competitors. Don't be afraid to reach out. If someone messages you on Twitter or LinkedIn and says, hey, I like this post and it's valuable, like reach out to them or respond or like the post. I've worked for some companies where they're so afraid to engage on social media. It's like, no, like reach out, do it. Also, don't worry so much about getting your posts approved on LinkedIn or social media. Like you want to make sure that the posts are professional and that the tone is right, but just get stuff out there. Like just post, just get it up, get it out there. This way, your chance of reaching more people is real, because it can take just one person with a lot of followers to share something, and then that's it. Like all of a sudden you have much more exposure. So social media is a weird place. So don't be afraid to just get stuff out there.
Now let's go ahead and answer that question that came in. I can hold off.
Okay. So Anna asked a follow-up question. What are the most common mistakes companies make when creating a content strategy? We've got about 3 minutes.
All right, I can talk about it in that 3 minutes. Thank you for your question. Common mistakes, I would say, is trying to do too much at once. We need a blog, we need a podcast, we need to revamp our social media, we need thought leadership pieces, and then they don't realize how much work it is. Like a typical podcast, I would say, takes maybe 12 to 15 hours to put together. And you tell that company is like, oh, wow, that's a lot. A company says, oh, I want to do a podcast a week. Okay, that's a lot of work. And you can do it in 10 hours. You can do it in 5 hours. You can do it in an hour. It's not going to be as good. You're going to lose engagement really quickly. So really focus on what you want to do. And then like start with one post a month or one social media post a week. And then you'll basically develop blueprints or templates and figure out how to make things easier and simpler on yourself. Like maybe a 3-question Q&A is way easier than a 12-question Q&A. Figure out what you can borrow and reuse. So if there's a social media quote card, with someone's name, like, can you just lift that and just change the text on it and just swap in a new headshot? That will save you time. And then also figure out if you can make things shorter, because this way, like you can always build off of it. You can always scale it up. You can always go from, 1 article a month to 3 a month. And then also when you're thinking of your content topics, like what you want to write about, pass it by people. Like don't just have a marketing team or just 2 or 3 people who decide what to write about. That can be informal. Even if you're talking with your friends, like, hey, would you read this article? Like if I wrote it. Also make sure, like, I think that the best content is content that doesn't just resonate with people in your industry. It's content that the average person would have some kind of interest in some way. So if you're a tech company, like how does your technology really improve people's lives? If you are an energy company, like why is sustainability important? Like think about kind of the bigger issues that you're trying to solve. And then like, don't be afraid to really step back and say, okay, like, is what we're doing sustainable? Should it be? Should that be an article? Like, why does sustainability matter? So you can also work backwards. Think about like a really big, broad topic like climate change or whatever. And if that doesn't resonate with you, skip it. Find something that does. And then
Jacqueline, thank you so much. I'm so sorry, but we're going to get behind. What
That's
I would
all right.
suggest to everybody is connect with Jacqueline. All of her contact information is available through the site for the summit. And I'm sure she will be happy to answer follow-up questions, speaking for her. And
That's
now I'm
great.
going to pass
Thank
it
you.
over to Javi. Thank you so much, Jacqueline.